Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. We are so glad that you are here today. This is the 4th annual seminar called When Faculty Say X, They Really Mean Y. And it's a seminar that we have to connect faculty to graduate students so that you all as graduate students and those of you who are visiting and who are prospective graduate students can have your questions answered by our faculty members. Our faculty members here at UMBC take a very strong opinion about their mentoring roles, and so we're very happy to have a faculty panel here today who are going to help you to have your questions answered. A little bit of history, about several years ago, to about 2003, some of the students in the Promise program wanted to learn more about what faculty were thinking and some of their questions. So we started having a session called How to Exceed Your Advisor's Expectations. And then in another seminar that we had for graduate students, graduate student orientation, Dr. Susan Sonnenschein, who is on our panel, had a chart that had 2 columns, and it had when faculty say, and then she had a list of things they mean, and then she had another list of things. And so we combined 2 of those seminars. Dr. Tim Topolewski, who was on our first panel back in 2003 with Advisors and Expectations, had a lot of good things to add, and so we combined those 2 seminars to this annual seminar that we now have every October. And so I know in the audience we have students from UMBC, College Park, some from UMB, and several students who are here visiting the math department here at UMBC from a number of universities. And so we welcome all of you to this session. We're very happy to have featured panelists today from a variety of different departments. And even if you don't see your department represented, please know that the faculty's answers generally can go across disciplines and you can have your question answered by them. So we have, and they're not necessarily in order, the order seated that they are on the screen, but we have Dr. Ian George from the physics department here to my immediate right, Dr. Henry Amurian from the information systems department, Dr. Susan Sonnenschein from psychology, Dr. Kathleen Hoffman from the Math and Statistics Department, Dr. Tim Topolewski from Mechanical Engineering, and Dr. Dan Fabry from Chemistry and Biochemistry. So let's welcome them. We thank our panel. And so again, the title of this is When Faculty Say X, They Really Mean Y. And one of the main questions that came up on our anonymous list, because we had a blog where students were able to post questions anonymously, is how do I know if my professor is saying what he or she thinks or means something else? And so the panelists some of the panelists have created a list of some of their own XY, some of their things when they say one thing, what they really mean. Now, some people say, well, whatever I say, that's what I mean. And they may think that, but there are sometimes some disconnects. And so we're here to try to make sure that some of those gaps are filled. So for any of the faculty members who have already prepared certain things that constitute their X and Y, we're going to start with that before we get to some of our anonymous questions. So we can just go down the line for whoever is ready to share their X's and Y's.
Go ahead.
Sure. So I came up with 2. If your advisor says that they would like to meet weekly with you, the translation is they want you to make weekly progress, show up at their office, and tell them about it. So it's not enough just to show up. You actually have to make the progress in the middle. So that was one of my first X and Y. The second one is if your advisor says, I'm giving a talk in the department on Wednesday at noon. Can we meet at 1? That means you should go to the talk at noon, and you should be prepared to answer the question, how did you like my talk? And it should be something a little bit more than, it was nice. You should actually have some constructive feedback about, oh, well, I really enjoyed the first part where you described X, or I was really hoping you could help me with Y. So those are the 2 that I came up with.
Let me continue on that route, the notion that there's a hidden message. So each year I've been invited, and I'm the graduate program director in the Applied Developmental Psychology program. How many of you are from the ADP program? I believe nobody is raising their hand. Where?
Was there one hand, one person from the Applied Developmental Psychology program?
No. I always send out an announcement, and today, shortly before I came over here, someone said, "Have a good talk." A student of mine. I find it also, I agree with you, when I sort of say I'm giving a talk at such and such, we can meet right after, there's an implicit message there that the student should attend the talk. I've also said things to students along the lines of, when you get a chance, would you do such and such? My window is a few hours or a day, depending on the task. It's not like sometime before you die, would you mind finishing, doing that?
Well, I had two, and one is appropriate to today. When I say, why don't you leave the panelists a little chocolate cake? Right, that means don't touch the chocolate cake, all right? You know what I'm saying? But the one I find myself using a lot is, you might want to read this paper, or you might want to look up the work of such and such an investigator. And in my mind, that's not necessarily a choice, whether you say, I might not want to. But it's me giving advice. I don't want to be dictatorial to my students. I want you all to be independent and independent thinkers. And so I don't want you to say, look up this paper and read it, or look up this author and read everything he or she has done. But that's what I'm implying, but trying to be nice about it. So often when an advisor says, you might want to do this, it means, if you're an independent thinking student worthy of the degree I'm about to bestow upon you, you better do it, right? In a sense, that's what it means.
And just to follow on that point, if it is suggested to you that you read a paper, look at an author, then you should be able to explain it. You should also be able to read around the subject area. So if you don't understand the introduction of the paper that I've suggested you read. We can't hear you in the back. I beg your pardon.
Oh, are these not on?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
If I suggest that you read a paper, then you should read around that paper as well. Understand the terms in that paper. Be prepared to explain that paper to me next time we meet. I don't want you to just say, the paper discusses such and such a subject, and then not be able to understand what that subject actually is, what those terms are. So do more than just read the paper, I suggest.
Let me also follow up on that. I periodically come across an article that I may think is pertinent for a student's work, and I'll send an article FYI, or here's an interesting article, here's an important article. That means you should read it and be prepared also to talk about it next time we meet, or include it in your thesis if that's what the context is.
And again on that, a lot of times an advisor will say, here's an interesting article, and that may mean we haven't actually read it, and we want you to read it and tell us whether it's relevant to your work or the work that we do, and whether we should also read that article.
Now there's an unwritten rule.
I just had a thought in listening to the speakers, and my interpretation is that there's a state of confusion involved here. And I would like to share with you my thought about that. I think it's perfectly okay to be confused. Because when I started out, I was confused. I think what you need to do is you need to give yourselves permission to be confused and continue to seek out information in that state. And in my opinion, you'll transition to another state. So I just like to... What I've observed is that sometimes students who feel confused think that there's something wrong with them. And I'm suggesting that it's something right with you, because that's probably the right feeling to have when you're first starting out in a very complicated environment. So I would say give yourselves permission to be confused, continue to work, seek out information, and clarity will come with time and effort.
To
to piggyback a little bit on what you were just saying. With my students, I always have a very long talk at the beginning, and I tell them that we're trying to make a transition here between being a student in the classic term, you go to the classroom and you read something and you learn from something that has been written, to being a scientist. When you're a scientist, you're learning for the rest of the world. You're figuring out things. The only way you can be effective to figure out things is by applying what you learn and take it to the next level. So you have to become, in a sense, a learning machine. You have to look for papers even before your advisor tells you read that paper, because you have a big picture of what the project is, and you're working toward figuring out what the problem is. This is at least what happens in chemistry. We are always trying to push the boundaries. And of course, it's uncharted territory. There is no way that I can point you toward a paper. We're doing it together, right?
Yeah, I think if I hear it correctly, you're suggesting that students at your stage should shift from being consumers of information to being producers of knowledge. And that shift is sometimes difficult for some students to make. You think you're here to be consumers. I just stopped by to tell you, wrong. You're here to be producers of knowledge as graduate students. And that takes a different orientation, I think, to your own selves and to the way you go about studying and accumulating knowledge and making contributions to the literature. I just had that thought.
And if I can add again something more, if you think about being confused, you should learn that that's a normal state of mind for a scientist. If you already knew everything there is to know, you wouldn't be investigating a certain problem, a certain field. The fact that you are confused and you want to shed light in there, that's exactly what drives us, what drives mentors and students. So you have to share in that a little bit. It's good to be confused sometimes.
And also maybe the word, I don't know if the word ignorant is right, but don't be afraid if you don't know something. I think most advisors recognize that you are not going to know everything all at once. But I think what drives advisors up the wall is when they see students not making an attempt to rectify that situation. You read a paper, you don't know the terminology, and you say, I had no idea what this paper meant, you throw it over your shoulder. That drives us batty, because that's not the inquiring minds we want to see in our research groups. So when your expectations are to become a person that's able to get beyond their ignorance or beyond their confusion, with our help.
Well, let's get to, if you don't mind, some of the questions that you all have posed, because we had more than 25 questions that were put into our online blog, and we have distilled those questions into 6 different categories. One category is starting out and learning the unwritten rules. The second one is boundaries. The third one is what happens when the faculty say no, when they tell you no. The fourth one is confrontation, disagreement, and communication. The fifth, feedback. And then the sixth one is life and balance. So let's start with the starting out and learning some of the unwritten rules. These are questions that have come directly from the graduate student body. This one says, I'm coming directly from undergrad, but some of my lab mates have more experience or a previous master's degree. Are the expectations the same for everyone? And along this line, the question has also been about finding a mentor within the department. And so maybe 2 of our faculty members on our panel can look at either one of these or both of these.
Let me answer the first part of the question. Coming right out of being an undergraduate, you don't have the same knowledge base and skills as a student working 3 years in my lab might. So although my eventual expectations for what skills you will have when you graduate are comparable, and perhaps the amount of work I expect you to do is comparable, I would not expect an incoming or first-year student to have the same skills. I would expect the student to express when they don't know something and be willing to seek out the assistance there.
But Dr. Sonnenschein, what about a student who is coming in, 2 students, both first years, but one already has a wealth of experience, perhaps having been in the field for a while, but they're both first-year graduate students. What about that? Are the expectations the same for both students?
It depends what the wealth of experience was. If they've worked as a research assistant at NIH doing statistical analyses, while the other student is straight out of undergraduate with one undergrad stat course, no, the one who has statistical experience knows more. If the experience isn't relevant in that way, then they're probably on the same footing.
I think the I think the expectations for effort may be the same. The expectations of dedication to your career may be the same, but I think you have to respect your own, where you're coming from. You have to respect your starting point. And when your mentors respect your starting point, let me put it the other way, if you respect your starting point, your mentors will respect your starting point and ask you to begin where you come in. So my advice is not to compare yourself with anybody else, with your colleagues, your mentors, but to find out what your starting place is, your starting point, and develop from there. Otherwise, there'll be unnecessary demoralization, because there's always somebody who knows more than you do and more than I do. So that's my advice about that. I would not ask two entering students or two students who had been in my lab for different periods of time. I would not have the same expectations of maybe sophisticated work, but I would have the same expectations for dedication and labor.
Okay, so the take-home message then is same expectations for effort, for dedication to the craft and dedication to the field and the discipline. How about finding an advisor or faculty mentor? There are certain departments where students do rotations and they're able to go from faculty member to faculty member, work in their labs for a little while. But for students who don't have that same kind of construct, what are some of your suggestions for finding a mentor in the department or an advisor?
So I have 3 that I wrote down. So the first suggestion I have would be to actually talk to the professors. I'm sure if you make an appointment with them and say, I would be interested in hearing something about your research, they will be more than happy to tell you all about it. They love to talk about their research. I know I do. So that is one thing I would recommend. The second thing would be to go to seminars in the department when the faculty speak. That's a really good opportunity to hear what's going on in their research group. And if you're considering a particular faculty member, but you're just not sure that they do the kind of work that you want to do, then ask them to do a reading course and see how it goes for a semester. So that's the 3 I came up with.
Yeah, I'd just like to add, you have to be proactive there.
Yeah.
I think they're not necessarily going to come and try and find you. You've got to be proactive and find them.
If I may add something, from the life sciences point of view, it's important the mentor that you choose, but it's also very important the field of research that they're choosing. Because you probably don't realize it, but by choosing a certain field, you might have better perspective for jobs afterward than by choosing other fields. And sometimes there is a lot of emphasis being placed on faculty personalities. Okay, this guy is very successful in his field. Why don't I join the lab of this person? I'm going to be very successful. Save for realizing that there are no opportunities or very little opportunities when you're done with that. So you have to think, it's a hard choice, you have to think a little bit ahead. With a PhD in chemistry, you can always switch field afterward, okay? You have very good fundamentals, but you're already ahead in the game if you're choosing the right field that has perspective afterward that allows you to develop in your chosen field. So that's also an extra layer of difficulty for choosing a mentor in chemistry.
Another thought would be to look at the faculty members' CVs online. Look at their publication history, look at their service history, their professional involvement, and see if there's a fit between your interests and what they've done in their career paths.
Or read their research. A lot of us post recent articles.
And it doesn't hurt to visit the lab and talk to the actual students that are doing the work there, and see whether if they're happy, their expectations, if they're evolving as professionals. See also if they get the chance to talk at national meetings. And you can evaluate all these things and then put in different columns, pros and cons, and then make a choice.
Could I just go back for a second to the first part of this question? The question sort of talked about a student who is less experienced compared to one who is more experienced. But I've also sometimes found that a student coming from a school where they've had, I'm a psychologist, where they've had a lot of research in a psych lab, you also have to be open to new experiences. Because you did it this way at school X as an undergraduate, this might not be the way that I do things. Now, you might have some suggestions for good ways, but you should also be open to learning new ways and not be totally set in your tracks from what you did as a prior student elsewhere.
Okay, thank you very much. This is sort of going in that same direction of finding an advisor. And I'm going to actually ask Dr. Topolesky to answer this one because
It's going to.
I know this is a topic that's near and dear to his heart. This one says, as a first-year student just joining a lab, how do I express my eagerness to start with my project when my advisor seems too busy for me?
So, and I was going to jump at this because I see some of my students out there, and who know, and not that other faculty members are not busy. I think, and I've told students this at orientation all the time, when I tell them to come by and see me, and a lot of students say, oh, you're too busy, Dr. T, I didn't want to bother you. I'd say, I'm always busy. If you ask any one of us here, we're always busy. Faculty members are never bored, all right? We never have a time on our hands when we're just wondering what the heck we're going to do. It's just part of the job, right? So, but I am president of the Faculty Senate right now. I'm also, like Dr. Sonnenschein, the graduate program director for our department. Today I was at the FDA most of the day. I met the new director for the CDRH, the Center for Devices and Radiologic Health. I'm on panels. We're all doing all this kind of stuff. And I try to get the message to my students. I'm looking at Beth right now because she came and talked to me just before this meeting. And yeah, I see you guys over there, Natasha and Montreal. So the idea is that I'm always busy, but I don't forget about you guys. I know you're there, but in my case, I need you to be proactive. I need the student to be proactive, to come find me. We'll make an appointment. Sometimes something comes up. You know, when the provost calls or something and has something going on and I've got to respond to that, I might ask you to wait for a few minutes. But if the student is being proactive and seeking the advisor, eventually the advisor's got to stop and say, yeah, I'll listen to you, right? If the advisor is bouncing off walls all the time that they're here and they're constantly, as we say, putting out fires, then they may not have time to stop by your office and just say, hey, how's it going? You know, but I think most faculty members here on campus, and we'll get the opinions from the rest, would just love to see you at any time, right? There may be some times where we have to say, you got to give me a half an hour, or let me come by your office in 10 minutes, which Beth may tell you when I say 10 minutes, it means any time within 45 minutes to the next 2 hours I'll come by the office, right? But I come by. All right, the idea is that I will. But you guys have to come after us. That's one of the best ways to really approach a busy advisor.
So be proactive is the
Absolutely.
take-home message here.
Absolutely.
Well, it may be risky, but my suggestion would be to go ahead and start your project anyway.
Good point.
Because you may not really have the kind of intense feedback and interactions that you had in another setting. And in my experience, that doesn't mean that something is wrong when you're graduate students. It just means that there's a different culture, and you may not have that frequent feedback on a moment by moment basis about your progress. So you have to be self-starters to some extent. But my advice is do it anyway, and then show your professor the data and publish it at the end.
Dr. Sonnenschein, did you want to add something to that, or see a difference in facial?
Faculty differ also, so you differ too. So you might also, if you're hanging around, you have a project, you want to start it, etc., you somehow can't hook up one way or another with a faculty member, you might try making an appointment and stating what you need. Like perhaps you need a bit more guidance, and let the faculty person know that what's taking place isn't quite working for you and what you would like to see. And assuming it's something reasonable, many faculty would be amenable to that.
Okay. Well, we have some other questions that are going to be coming up where maybe some students have found that their faculty aren't quite as amenable to that, but we'll get to that in a little while. Let's talk about boundaries. I think this one was very interesting. This came from an international student. This student says, in my country, it's very disrespectful to tell a professor that you can't do something, even if it is related to personal favors. So how do I let my professor know that I don't think I should be doing personal favors, like walking his dog or helping his children with their homework? I also don't know what to do when my professor says that I should work on American holidays like Thanksgiving. I would like to experience that holiday too with my friends. So how do I say no to these things? I don't want my professor to hold it against me. So what are your thoughts regarding...
Well, see, when I first saw this, I just have to tell you, I said, gee, we get so many good ideas from our graduate students that I have a first grader and a third grader, and they're also learning Chinese. I see some of my Chinese student colleagues. So anytime you want to give them help with their homework,
Boundaries. Let's talk about boundaries.
Sorry, I thought it was good ideas.
How should a student react to that, particularly when they come from a culture where they're looking at the professor as a supervisor? They don't want to do anything to make them disgruntled or upset or say anything that's going to cause them to think negatively of them. How do you handle that?
At least in physics, the physics department here, we have a first-year mentor, not the advisor, but a mentor for all the first years. So I think that would be a time where you would have to pluck up the courage and discuss it with the mentor, and they could contact your advisor and say, this is totally inappropriate to walk the dog. I think that's the only way you can do it.
So I would also encourage you to talk to your graduate program directors.
Yes.
Because I am also a graduate program director, and I would like to emphasize that graduate program directors are there to enforce the rules in the department, but we're also facilitators of your success. So we like people to graduate. We really do like our graduate students to be successful. And so also look at your graduate program director as a resource for things when you don't know what you should do. You should always go to them and say, how should I handle this? What should I do?
And, okay.
I was going to say about the Thanksgiving thing. I remember back in the day when I was a graduate student, and there was a very special one-of-a-kind piece of equipment at Cornell, a synchrotron. It's, physics guys will know what it is. The only time my group could get time on it, I think, was New Year's Eve, or New Year's morning from 2 to 4 in the morning. All right? So you say, well, if that's the only time of the year you can get time on it, maybe that particular year we had to give up or leave the party early, you know what I mean, if it was New Year's 2 in the morning. But I want to expand also on what was said, that not only do graduate program directors deal with questions of whether it's appropriate to walk the dog, but items or issues like whether something is ethically correct. If you have a question about something you have been asked to do, either participate in research or co-author a paper or work on a proposal or interact somehow, and you're not sure about whether it's appropriate, come talk to one of us. In my department, I tell the students, you know, everything that we talk about behind the closed door is always confidential. And many times it's a matter of communication. You didn't quite understand. Your advisor said X and you interpreted it as Y, and you don't understand what was being asked and you need clarification. And we're happy to do that.
Let me go to the next question, which is similar. This one says, what do I do if a professor asks questions about my personal life, as an example, that I don't feel comfortable answering? And what I would like for our faculty panel to do is to give some exact words that students should use. So instead of saying, just tell them that it's inappropriate, what are some exact words? So let's say student is sitting across from a faculty member and they should say, and then give some exact words that they should say. I think that would be very helpful for our students.
I thought about that. I said to myself, I would say, well, you know, I'm really a very private person and I'm not really comfortable sharing that with you.
Okay.
But what this suggests to me is that the faculty needs to have a seminar like this,
Yes.
from what I've heard, because, go ahead.
We are talking about that, by the way, trying to see.
When I read this, I also wondered what the context
Right.
was.
What you doing this weekend?
Yeah, right.
I mean, it's a professional relationship a mentor has with a student, and there are boundaries clearly, but you work closely together, and it's a collegial relationship. And, you know, is it just sort of, so what are you doing over the weekend? Is it that you're seeming very perturbed or something like that, and your mentor's not sure, are there issues going on in your life? Or I had a student who told me she was having some personal problems. And I hadn't known it, which doesn't say much for how, you know, it says how dense I am or something. But then I wondered later, do I follow up and sort of say, you're doing okay now? And the person had told me a lot, but looked better later. You know, so there are boundaries, and you have to figure out the context in which it's taking place. If it's wholly inappropriate, I mean, you know, you're sitting there discussing something and the remark really seems off the wall, you could say, I don't feel comfortable, but that could be a bit insulting.
But I think it depends who initiates this interaction. I think if I notice someone in distress, a student in distress, I feel an obligation to check that out. So that may seem like an invasion of privacy, but to ignore that, I think, would be irresponsible of me. But if I don't see a student in distress and I initiate what seems to be a personal or an interaction, a question that crosses the professional boundary, I think that would be inappropriate.
And for students, just so that you know, there are boundaries related to sexual harassment, to amorous relationships, and things along that line. In most of the universities have a handbook for graduate students that talk about those boundaries. Faculty have a handbook that talk about those kinds of boundaries. There are human relations offices on campus where you can talk to someone to just check to see if maybe you're misinterpreting a situation or if it's something that needs to be followed up on. So those are some things to keep in mind.
But how do you continue working with the person after you tell the person, by the way, this could be sexual harassment and I'm going to file charges? You know, that there has to be a way of maintaining your privacy and boundaries without ending your graduate career here.
It's a hard one. It's a hard one, but those things I know are worked out generally by the Mediation Center. I know that we have a Mediation Center here on campus, and they try to work some things out. Perhaps there might be a change of advisor or something
that
along
I could
that line.
see. I mean,
So
you have
they
to
try
think
work
about
together.
getting reasonable boundaries, and if you still want to work with this person, how you establish that in a way that leaves you some wiggle room.
Right. So
That's very important, and that's perhaps hopefully an extreme case, but isn't the question more the sort of more general personal life? Isn't that the more common?
I have no idea what the exact question is.
Well, isn't it more common that people just feel uncomfortable talking, being asked questions by their advisor or talking about certain subjects with their advisor, rather than crossing that boundary?
I think sometimes it depends on the person. There are some people who maintain a very private persona, and then there are others who want to share the world, and that is not always appropriate either, to tell your advisor what you did over the weekend, especially if it's really delving deeply into your personal life. Your advisor doesn't need to know all of those kinds of details that might reflect negatively on you later, so you have to keep those kinds of things in mind as well. So
I think for just a sentence, I don't feel comfortable talking about that right now is, an easy one just to get you out of the office.
So that sounds good. Okay, let's move on. When a faculty member says no, now this is something, it gets a little bit touchy. So let's see. Students are asking, what do I do when? One person says, I want a certain professor on my committee, but my advisor doesn't seem to want that person. What do I do in that case? Another one says, I have funding to go to conferences, my own funding. I have a fellowship, I applied for it, it's my own funding, but my advisor said, no, I couldn't go to that conference. Why would he or she say no? What do I do in these kinds of situations where my advisor is saying no to me and there's something that I want to do?
Again, I was talking to my student earlier, and I had exactly that second situation in my own career. I had a paper accepted to a World's Biomaterial Conference in Kyoto, Japan. My advisor said he didn't have any money to send me, and who wouldn't want to go to Kyoto, right, for a conference? I said, I'll pay my own way. And he said, no. And I said, what, you're telling me I can't spend my own money to go to this conference? And as I thought back on it over the last 3 years since I graduated, that, you know, I thought, well, maybe it was a matter of pride for my advisor to have a student present something, but that he didn't have the resources to pay my way to go there, and he didn't want to look bad, in a sense. Maybe that was his motivation. But in my case, I would never want a student not to go to a conference and not to use double negatives, I guess. But if you guys got your own money, absolutely, I think that's part of your professional development, and I think then you have an issue you may want to take up with a graduate program director or chair.
I have something to add here, actually. In my lab, I have a very simple rule. If anybody wants to go to a conference, they have to have new data to present. So this is a development issue for everybody. When we are going to a conference, we are not going there as tourists. We're not going there to visit Kyoto or Rome or what have you. We are going there to build a CV, to be able to present our work, to be able to present new original data. We don't go to the same, I don't go to a conference with the same data twice in a row. Okay, I need to have new data to go there. If a student comes to me and say, hey, I have this wonderful data here, I know that I can go there and present. Can you send me? It doesn't matter if this person has money or not. I will send him or her to present our data, to be ambassador for our research in there. It's good for us, it's good for granting, it's good for the person that goes to present. I actually make a point that every graduate student and postdoc that comes through my lab, they always have to present at least once as a speaker, not just as a poster, as a speaker at a talk, at a national or international meeting. And up to this point, we've been successful at doing that. And this is just, I use that actually to give motivation to do work and get new data. And it seems to work fairly well for the people that stick with me. I should say that this just applies to my lab. I don't know how my colleagues are doing it in chemistry, but it seems to work.
Okay.
I think also, though, it's reasonable to ask why, as Tim did. But another issue is I had a student come and explain his future research plans to me, which involved him being out of the country for maybe a month of a semester. And, you know, he said, yeah, this will work out fine. I said, but you have a TA. And this would be a month in the semester. And he said, yeah. And I said, you have a TA. He said, yeah. And so I realized I wasn't being as clear as I might be. And I said, and who's going to cover for you? And he was sort of taken aback. And I said, I understand this is a good opportunity for you. And if you can't complete your research during January when there are no classes, you need now to make arrangements with other people to cover your TA, because this could be the case here that there are obligations here the student has that need to be taken into account.
Okay. And what about that first question regarding a person that the professor doesn't want on the committee? Dr. George?
Again, ask why. I suspect your advisor has a very good reason not to want that person. It may be something you don't know about professionally or even personally. So ask why.
So let me follow up on this particular question and sort of ask the unwritten piece here. Are there certain words that faculty members will use that mean no, but they're not really saying no? And if so, what are those words that faculty members use when they're saying, I don't want you to do that, I don't want that person on your committee, I don't want you to go there, I don't want to be involved with that type of research, but they're not saying it so clearly. What are some of the words that are used?
Of course you can do that, but, but I would suggest you do such and such, or this person might be a better choice for your committee.
The way I do it is I try to get my graduate students to realize that committees are resources for them. So when we're there in a committee and we are talking about a candidacy, a project, we want to have the best person there to advise us, to keep us straight. Oh no, you guys cannot do this because it's been done before, or it's not going to work for you. So the argument that I will use if somebody is there that I don't think will be a good person is, well, look at the background of this person. Do you think this person would be a valuable addition to this resource for you? It's not about getting the easiest person that will ask the easiest question during a candidacy. Being asked the easiest question doesn't help you. Okay, really, to get your project going, you need to have a very critical person, somebody that knows his or her stuff, that is capable of contributing to your project. That's the person that you want. Usually when I have this talk with them, they start to backtrack and think a little bit harder. If they still want the person there, even if I have personal problems or I know that this person is not going to be valuable, I tend to relent and say, okay, fine, but you know, don't expect too much in terms of contribution from that person.
Okay. So you're more comfortable apparently saying something negative
about
another
very
faculty
straight.
member.
I tend to be very straight. Even, you know, we tend to know each other in the faculty, and people know pretty much what the opinion of each other might be. And there is no reason for hiding this thing. I'm not worried that you will go and report to the other person, hey, my boss said that you are not going to contribute to our project.
I prefer to say it more obliquely.
No, I'm very, very straight on that.
But an indirect way would be to say, are you sure that professor has time? That's an indirect way of signaling that maybe it's not a good fit.
You may want to reconsider. It's a good way to say no.
So are you all taking notes? Because I know that we have some of this on tape, but some of these things are real gems because you're not going to necessarily see them in a handbook somewhere, and they're really giving you those unwritten rules, and those are the kinds of things that we want you to have so that you can be successful.
Just to add, I think the external member of your committee, that's where you have to really take the advice of your advisor. There can be, in my field at least, it can be, should we say, competitive. There might be people that really want to shoot down your work because they want to shoot my work down. So the external one is a hard one, in my field anyway.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, here's another one that's pretty tough. This student says, my advisor seems to be distancing him or herself from me. I don't get invited when special guests come, or I don't get told about special fellowship opportunities that other people in the group do. How do I reconnect, and what do I do if he or she is really trying to tell me to go to another lab?
Okay, this is the busy advisor syndrome perhaps, right? One thing you might want to assume is that your advisor is not distancing themselves from you, but that they're scatterbrained like me, all right? Honestly, at the FDA, I was asked to name my students, and I went through the list, and I said, and I know I have 2 more, but I just can't think of their names right now. I really couldn't, even though I see them, 2-3 times a week. I'm sorry, but so again, a direct approach may be useful in some cases to say, "Hey, I'm here. Don't forget about me. I'm interested in the group. I'm interested in participating. If you feel brave enough to say, so-and-so, you passed on this fellowship opportunity to so-and-so, but I didn't hear about it. How come?" It may be a simple explanation like, it wasn't appropriate for you. One example, very clear example, is there are minority fellowships that are available, or fellowships that are available for women only. And, if a white male graduate student comes to me and says, how come? Well, you're neither a minority, you're not an African American, nor are you a woman. I couldn't pass it on to you. So it may be a communication issue. So that would be the first step. And then if it's not a communication issue, if there's something else, I'm going to pass that on to my colleagues to answer.
Passing it on.
I think if it is not a scatterbrained response, then if I were a student, I would seek out another explanation. I would look at my own activity in the lab or in my discipline, and I would take stock. I would take stock of myself at that point, and maybe the deficiencies. And if there are, I need to address those deficiencies, and maybe directly with the professor who's mentoring me. Or I may ask him directly, do you have issues with my progress over the past month or so?
Okay.
If it really is an indirect communication.
If I can add something to this, I'm a person that is really consumed by my research. I think research around the clock. And the best way to get my attention, my students know that, is to approach me and say, hey, I ran the experiment we were discussing last time, and no results came up. At that point, I'm going to drop everything and we're going to start to discuss things. And it might be a good way to reconnect. I'm also a very busy person, travel and all that. But that's the easiest way to get my attention. And I know that a lot of my colleagues are the same. You just talk to them about the last experiment that you planned and it didn't work, and then you reconnect. When you take stock, as you were saying, about your situation in the lab, you have to look at your involvement with your own project. You have to take ownership of your own project. If you don't take ownership of your own project, if you don't take ownership of these experiments that you planned and did them, well, that may be a reason why your advisor is not paying attention to you. You're not bringing new results, even negative results. Sometimes negative results are even more important than the positive results because we are learning what we need to do next. But if you don't bring them up, your advisor will just think, okay, this guy is just progressing on his own, no problem, nothing to talk about that. But as soon as you come up and say, hey, the experiment didn't work, or you get his or her attention right away.
There's also the issue of being around, being responsive. So if I say there's an interesting talk tomorrow, you know, are you someone who actually goes to the talks? If I've made other overtures and you tend not to respond via email or anything, at some point I will take the hint and stop making the overtures too. It doesn't mean I don't want you in the lab at all, but you've moved from top tier to a lower tier because you're not responding and taking advantage and doing.
So I think that's an interesting thought, that as hard as it may be to hear, that a student can move in a professor's mind from one tier to another tier. And so you have to sort of think about how to stay at that top tier, because that's going to be very important. So let's continue, and we're sort of in the same vein now. We're talking about confrontation and when there's disagreement with your advisor and how to communicate. So this one is a little bit different. This one is sort of confrontational, but when a student needs to ask a professor a question about their own milestones and their own stress level. If your mentor does not have tenure, how do you have a candid discussion about their tenure schedule and where your progress as his or her student fits into that timeline? And for those of you who are brand new students and don't know about tenure, tenure is that process that a faculty member goes through for 6 or 7 years, and once they have that and they have been approved by their department and their college and their university, then they have the permanent job in the department. They have to be approved by their peers internally and externally. But that's a long process. It requires a lot of service, and a lot of publications are the main thing. So it's a very tenuous process for faculty members to go through. So how does a student address that and ask a faculty member about that process?
Well, I just wanted to maybe clarify this point. This is an X and Y. The question, what the professor may interpret that question to mean. If the professor is not tenured, in fact, what you're asking him or her is, are you going to be fired in 3 or 4 years and being forced to leave the university?
Yeah.
And if so, what's going to happen to me? So, no, it's, yeah, it's kind of funny, but that's what that question is interpreted, how that question will be interpreted by a faculty member, which I think makes it even more difficult. One way you might approach that is, again, you might have to feel a little brave about this, but you approach your faculty member and say, I understand that publications are important for you to get tenure. I would really like to have some publications. How can I help you so that we can get these joint publications out that will help both of us, for example?
Isn't this really a question for the GPDs? The GPDs should be making sure you have a program and an advisor who is frankly likely to get tenure. Is that not the case, GPDs?
Well, in our department, we know, I mean, I know the progress of the faculty members, yes, and when that faculty member is coming close, I pretty much will figure out who their students are, and in my mind, I'm thinking, what will happen to those students if the faculty member doesn't get tenure? Are they far enough along so, for example, even if the faculty member does leave the university, the student can still get their degree granted? Or would they have to move to a different advisor? So we do take that into account.
In some situation like this, your committee, your dissertation committee actually is very, very important, at least in chemistry and biochemistry. When you form this committee, that's your resource. You know that if your advisor gets fired next year, like Tim said, you can rely on them to sometimes continue and finish the project that you had going with your advisor, obviously depending on funding. And at that point, you would be supervised by somebody in the committee. I've seen it before.
And just to maybe allay the fears here, in my experience at UMBC, what makes us kind of a neat place for all the faculty is, unlike other schools where they may have a reputation or there's a rumor that they'll hire 3 or 4 people with the intention of only keeping one faculty member and letting the other 3 go after tenure, UMBC doesn't work like that. In my experience, every faculty member that's hired in every department is hired because we fully expect them to be tenured, and we want them to be tenured. So you guys don't have to worry about it. Not everybody makes it, but we have, it's more of a philosophy through many of the departments that we really want to bring people in who are going to be successful and stay here. So don't be worried that a lot of your faculty members might not make it.
I think each department may do some aspects of it differently. If we've admitted a student to the program, we have a mentor-mentee relationship, but they're the people who've left, not because they didn't get tenure, but their life changed, they got a better offer elsewhere, right. And someone else in the department takes over for the student, assuming the student still wants to stay, which has been the case. So we look out for students. Frankly, it's not as ideal as it is if the faculty member were still there, but we do watch out for the students.
In our department, it's sometimes the case that junior faculty, assistant professors, dissertation committees, they will serve as a co-chair, and there'll also be a tenured faculty member mentoring the assistant professor as to how to be a dissertation mentor. There's no general rule about that, but I have seen that in the department. I mean, another easy fix is don't choose an assistant professor. Select someone who's tenured, but that doesn't always work out.
And it might be ideal to choose an assistant professor who's hungry to get publications. As Tim said, it could very well work in your interests.
And so how about this second piece about an advisor who isn't meeting deadlines that maybe they have set themselves with their students, submitting paperwork, signing off on things that the grad student might need, letters of recommendation, commenting on papers that they need to get back, etc. How should a conversation be broached in that case?
This was one of my students, wasn't it?
I do.
Again, be proactive. Make sure that the student, as a student, make sure the advisor knows these deadlines are coming up and get in their face, frankly.
But when you say get in their face, Dr.
If something needs signing,
Okay, but
so
what are some of the words that they can use? I'd like to have the students have some tools.
You
that they
do
can go
remember
back.
this deadline is next week, tomorrow, this afternoon?
Just a reminder that this is due.
Let's step back. Let's assume you did everything correctly. So you submitted whatever paperwork and you clearly told the faculty member it needs to be received by, turned in by, et cetera, et cetera. So you made it as easy as possible. It's not that you waited till the 11th hour and then expected the faculty member to do that. Then start sending the reminders. I just wanted to remind you that this is due tomorrow, you know, please let me know when it's turned in, things
I
along
would
those
actually
lines.
appreciate that. I mean, it just helps it. Again, we're kind of scatty and we've got a lot of things going on. An email reminder or any type of reminder would be useful.
Let me add a step to this that's not included in the question. Is it ever appropriate to go around the advisor if the advisor is being unresponsive?
I had a student who complained to Janet Rutledge that I was not getting feedback to her in a timely manner. And so we went through the feedback that I was getting, and it turned out that I was getting the feedback back to the student faster than the student was turning around the stuff to me. I resented it a great deal that the student hadn't come to me directly and said, I need you to turn this around faster, or more politely, would you please? I was taking around a week to read drafts of her thesis, which I thought was more than reasonable, actually. And I then sent it to the chair of my department, who then wrote to Janet saying that I was perfectly reasonable. I mean, you need to be careful before you go over someone's head. If, in fact, however, that something just sits on somebody's desk beyond a few weeks and you've reminded the person, go to the GPD, go to the chair of the department.
So there is an order of operations. You always try to do as much as you can with your advisor, with your principal faculty member first. You do all of the things that were mentioned, email reminders, in-person reminders, all of those things. And then if and only if there is no response, then you don't go directly to the dean of the graduate school. You still work within your department. Okay, so these are the instructions. These are the instructions that are
Can I
clear.
just add something about time frame? I graduated in 1997, and I still had ongoing papers with my advisor that hadn't gotten published yet. I had some out, I had some we were working on. And I had a hard time getting feedback from my advisor after I left the group. I was in a postdoc, I was in an assistant professor position. And I didn't have anybody to go to sort of pull rank on him. I couldn't make my advisor read my paper. And so I would send him reminders, and then he'd stop sending me back any email. And so it was like 6 or 7 years that the paper sat on his desk.
Whoa.
And I finally wrote to him, and I said, I'm going up for tenure. I really need to decide what happens with this paper. And I see 3 possible options for what could happen to this paper. Could you please comment on which one you think seems likely? And one of the options was the paper never gets published. And I was happy to accept that. So if you're complaining that your advisor doesn't get back to you in a week, I mean, I've waited 6 years for my advisor to get back to me. And in the end, I actually had to publish the paper on my own with his blessing. He said, go for it.
You know, in terms of things to say,
Yeah.
I'm reading the question is not meeting deadlines, and that could have serious consequences. Part of me thinks that maybe you could go to your GPD and say, well, my advisor seems really preoccupied. I wonder if you could sign these documents for me. And that may signal to the GPD that he or she needs to talk to the advisor or the faculty member about hopefully
But you're
responding
still
more
within the
quickly.
purview of the
The department.
department at
Yeah.
that level. Okay.
And when you hand a paper in, it's reasonable to say, you know, how long do you think it'll take before you're able to get me feedback? So that you give the faculty member, well, I have to get this grant application out by such and such date, but after that, I can get to it.
Okay. That actually moves into some of our other things about timelines. This person says, my advisor currently has me on a 5-year plan, but I would like to be on a 4-year plan. How do I express this to my advisor respectfully and come up with a realistic timeline? And then the other one is when the faculty say they don't expect you to decrease your lab time to study for candidacy exams, how do you effectively express your disagreement? So these are dealing with timelines, what a student thinks is appropriate versus what a faculty member thinks is appropriate. So how should those conversations be formed respectfully? Because there might be some disagreement and confrontation in those kinds of discussions.
I think the first one is easy, and it's the case of actions speak louder than words. So either get your work done 80% faster, or produce 25% more work in the given time. If you work out the math, that's doing 5 years of work in 4 years. So if you are showing me that you are the kind of student who really wants to go out there and get their work done in a shorter time, you have to be producing at that pace. So that doesn't require any awkward conversation. That says, well, I plan to do this much this week, but look, I did 25% more. And if you do that on a regular basis, then you have the data, like Dr. Fabrice was saying. Now I've got new data to come to your faculty member and say, hey, you know what? I was on this 5-year plan, but look, I've progressed much farther than we originally planned. I've met my milestones much earlier. Can we revise my plan? You're in the driver's seat at that point.
So I did this actually when I was a grad student. I got the last result I needed from my thesis at the end of January. I remember very distinctly, it was the 3rd week of January 1997. And I went to my advisor and I said, I'd like to graduate in May. He said, you'll never get your thesis written in time. You're going to graduate in August. I said, okay, but that's going to be my goal. And then I gave him a draft of my thesis, and I said, I still want to graduate in May. He said, you'll never get this thing in shape in time. I said, okay, but that's going to be my goal. And this went on for months. I rewrote my thesis and rewrote my thesis, and we were actually both wrong. I defended in May and walked in May, and I actually got my diploma in August.
Compromise.
Exactly. But I said, okay, but this is going to be my goal. This is what I'm going to shoot for, and this is exactly what you were saying. I just was determined that I was going to finish in May, and if that meant I had to rewrite 250 pages every week, then that's what I was going to do.
You might also want to ask why your advisor thinks 5 years instead of 4. If you're, and again, I think each of the disciplines may differ here, but if you're aiming for an academic position, at least in my field, publications are the name of the game. And it could be that your advisor thinks you'd be more competitive. Not that you would be better having finished, but that you can get more publications out and in the pipeline within 5 years rather than 4, and you can have a discussion about that, as well as you might say, yes, that's true, but I don't have funding beyond 4 years. So bring all the issues onto the table and see what the issues really are.
Okay, great, thank you. And what about this workload issue, where you have students who have a lot of work, and now they're trying to study for their exams, and that workload is not being decreased? How should a student handle that?
Well, in our case in chemistry, the candidacy is very much related to the work that you're doing. You're presenting your own preliminary data, defending your own preliminary data. I had students that already had publications at the time of candidacy, so it was a foregone conclusion that we knew that the project will work out. In some cases, we don't know that, and therefore we need to have some good ideas to present to the committee and be able to say, hey, we got this far, we know it's going to work out, it's going to be a good thesis project, it's going to look good, we're going to have publications, and you're going to be in good shape for the next step, trying to get the job of your dreams when you're done. So very, very much, there is a decrease in the workload because I know that my students will be writing it up, but then we know that this write-up is going to be the draft of the next paper that we're going to write. So from our point of view, it's almost a seamless transition between doing the work in the lab and preparing for the candidacy. But it might be just the discipline.
Okay, so, and I know there are
In
changes in disciplines, and when I was in graduate school, when it came time for candidacy exams, we were allowed to take an independent study course to help to fill out that, that full-time status during that time, one semester before you were about to take your exams. But in this case, is there a way to express disagreement or to try to have that conversation to see if the workload can be decreased or something along that line, or does the student just have to go with the flow?
This is kind of difficult. I mean, I have met faculty in several departments who would like to do away with candidacy exams because they feel that the effort made by the student is going to detract from their lab work. Other faculty, and myself included, feel that candidacy is an important milestone for the student to go through for many reasons, and I would like to see them do a good job, and I'm willing to give them a little bit of time off from lab work so that they do a good job in the candidacy exam, similar to what Dr. Fabrice says. I don't know the best way to deal with professors who think it's a waste of time and say, but by the same token, if the candidacy exam is in place, even if the faculty member doesn't think it's important, if their student doesn't pass the candidacy exam, they're not going to be happy. So it may be a matter of going to your advisor, again, not just sitting back and saying, what do I do, but be proactive, have a plan to say, this is what I'd like to do, and here's how I have my schedule worked out, and here's how I plan on meeting my either real or perceived lab obligations, here are the milestones, and here's how I plan on studying for the exam. At least then you have a framework to talk to your advisor, and they know that you're thinking about it seriously. And I think many advisors, when they see a game plan to see that you've put that much effort into it, are going to be willing to discuss it with you. That's one suggestion.
In that department, I don't think workload is lowered when the candidacy exam is scheduled. My advice would be to start studying for the candidacy exam early.
Right.
Because in that department, it's known what papers will be covered on a candidacy exam, and it's not wise to put it off until the last minute or even several months before the candidacy exam. So I would plan well in advance for the candidacy exam.
And Dr. Amirian, your definition of early is when?
When you walk in the door, I mean, that's a facetious response. Early, maybe the semester before the candidacy exam, I think would be a ballpark.
Okay, great, thank you. We have 2 more categories, 4 more sets of questions in the last 15 minutes. Let's talk about feedback. This is a long one, but it's all based on clarity. A student asks, is it appropriate to ask the same question to a professor a second time if you're not completely sure what that professor meant the first time? The second part of this is, does it seem frustrating to professors when students persist in asking questions that may, to the professor, seem minor? And then the final part of this, how do you deal with professors who put you down or make you feel stupid when you ask them questions for which answers are based on your command of previous material? So if faculty members can answer maybe one person can answer one of these questions, I think that would be helpful to our audience.
I'll take number 1 then.
Okay.
Yes, it's appropriate to ask if you don't understand, but I think that you should demonstrate that you have tried to understand it, or at least be able to express better. Don't just ask exactly the same question again. Be able to express what you don't understand. You've worked at it. That would be my response. But don't not ask a question because you don't understand. I mean, that's...
Can you expound on that a little bit,
Well,
Dr.
don't
Dewar?
pretend you understand if you don't understand. That's very frustrating. When I ask a student, you understand what I'm talking about, yeah? And they nod and say yes, and then go away, and obviously they come back with stuff where they didn't even understand what I was telling them. So that's one of my biggest frustrations, honestly. Students pretending to understand something when they don't. I'd much rather you ask a question think about my response, perhaps do a little research on your own, and then if you still don't understand, come back and ask again. Perhaps a little tail between legs, but come back and ask again, please.
Okay. So along this line, does it seem frustrating to professors when students persist in asking questions that may seem minor? And you're saying yes in one sense, but there's a way to continue to ask, showing that there's some thought that's been put into the question. So it's been answered once, and putting some thought behind it is the way to continue to ask the question, but not necessarily asking the same question over and over again. So I think that's the, okay, so then what about the third one? Because when there's unfortunately a professor who makes a student feel stupid, and this can happen to a student in class or in email, it can happen over Blackboard, it can happen maybe when the student is not in the room and the faculty, they hear from other people in the lab or in the group. How does a student deal with that?
I can take that one. So I would say that this has happened to me in grad school, where a professor has attempted to make me feel like I was asking a stupid question. But I was determined that I was going to get my degree, and I needed something from them. I needed them to explain a concept to me. So I stood there and took it, and I said, yes, I really need you to explain this to me. And I just stayed determined and persistent that I was going to get what I needed to succeed in my program. And if it meant that I had to stand there and have a professor think that I was stupid for asking this question and actually insinuate I was stupid for asking that question, then that's what it took. On another note, you have to understand that as you progress through your career, you're going to write grant proposals and it's going to be reviewed, and you're going to write papers and they're going to be reviewed, and you may not always get glowing reviews. You may get some extremely harsh criticism on these reviews, and you have to learn to deal with this. You have to learn to read these reviews and look for constructive feedback. What can I do better? Or the reviewers just don't have any idea what I'm talking about, and clearly it's their problem, right? So you have to be able to look at things and get what you need from them and get the constructive criticism and stay determined and focused on what you need to do in order to succeed.
And there's maybe two ways for any of us to feel stupid. One way is when a student comes in and says, I can't figure this out, I tried and tried and tried and tried. I reach up on my bookshelf, pull out a book, open a page, and I say, it's right there, the answer's 3. and I've had this happen to me, and sure. You feel bad because not because the professor said something nasty to you, but you realize that you didn't do your job the way you should have. And when I talk about you, I say me as well. And I can give you an example of this afterwards that happened to me this week, all right? I was able to correct it, but it's something that I did, and boy, did I feel stupid for doing it. The other way is if there is a faculty member who is abusive or nasty, and I don't like to see that myself, and if you have a case like that, come talk to me, all right? And I've had students come talk to me, not from my department, all over the place, to ask me questions about this. And in confidence, the GPDs, we can help you with that. If it's professors are being nasty, there may be something wrong there. Hopefully that will never happen to you. But if it does, what I would really suggest is not necessarily confronting the faculty member, but seeking somebody else like the GPD or the department chair.
I think it's also really important. I mean, one of the things I find really frustrating, it came up here, is a student doesn't ask. Mm-hmm. You know, I say, please get this done, and the student says yes, yes, yes. And down the road, I get stuff that's garbage because there are errors in it because the student didn't actually understand what I was requesting. I had a situation where a lot of my primary data was destroyed. And the student who oversaw this never took any responsibility, which was really very frustrating. Say I screwed up. I don't know why I did, et cetera, than just sort of saying, well, I don't know how it happened, I didn't do it. It's extremely frustrating. If you make a mistake, take responsibility, attempt to correct it if it's correctable at all, and then move on. But don't just sort of deny any culpability here.
What I think about that is that when I was a student, I would say to acknowledge that in this business, there are very few small egos around. There are very many big egos. And sometimes they get out of control. And if you're a student who happens to be the target of what seems to be a put down, I think you just have to tell yourself, I'm not going to be demoralized by this. This is part of the business, and I'm going to thank the professor for his comments and go on about my business. Tell yourself not to be demoralized by it.
Okay. Excellent. This moves on. It was a good segue to pet peeves that you may have as faculty members regarding some things that students may do, either at the master's level or PhD level, inside or outside of the classroom. Maybe two of you can take this. What are some pet peeves that we're willing to put out there to let students know? These are things that professors do not like. Dr. Sonnenschein mentioned some, Dr. George mentioned some.
I have one. I really hate what I call the excuse train. I'll get it for you by Monday. It's Tuesday. Oh, I'll get it for you by Thursday. It's Friday. Mm-hmm. But I'll definitely do it this weekend. Just please, not the excuse train. I don't want to hear one excuse after another, after another, after another. And if you get that thing done, it's just the next thing, and then there's 20 more excuses that I have to sort through. I don't like the excuse train. That really annoys me. I'd rather just have a realistic deadline.
A realistic deadline. And
yes.
So this goes to respectfully, can a student respectfully tell their professor, if the professor says, I want it by Monday, can a student respectfully say, that's something like that sounds like a good deadline, but I think I can more realistically have it for you by Wednesday and have it more complete by that day.
Sure. And then maybe the faculty member says, well, just give me what you have by Monday. Right. And if you have it done by Wednesday, that's good too. But sure, absolutely.
I mean, it depends what it is too. Let's say I'm working on a grant proposal. Grant proposals are not accepted after the deadline. True. And you're assisting me, and you tell me you will get me something by a certain time. If you knew starting out that there wasn't a hope in hell that you could do that, tell me so I can make other arrangements, not that it screws things up. If it's your thesis and I'm saying get it to me by Friday and you don't think you can do it, say I will try, but it's more realistic that I will get it to you by the following Wednesday because I have X, Y, and Z. You choose which one you choose to do depending on does it affect you or does it affect me.
Sometimes it's a little bit something that we have to learn how to manage expectations. We have expectations for you, you have expectations for us. And there are realistic expectations, some expectations are not realistic. If you start to tell your advisor, oh yeah, I'm going to do these experiments tonight or tomorrow or so on, well, you are already putting the expectation there in the mind of your advisor that the data will be on the table or you will be ready to discuss the results Monday, Tuesday, whenever you said you are going to be. And then if you couldn't do that because it didn't work out, okay, let's discuss why it didn't work out. But if you couldn't do it because your expectations were not realistic, you had other plans for the weekend or you wanted to do other things, your advisor need to know that. You cannot put the expectation in the advisor mind and then open to go with the excuse train. And I think that's actually a two-way street. I tend to treat my students as colleagues. I try to establish a relationship like a colleague, okay? Maybe you're the junior colleague, I'm the senior colleague, but still colleagues. We are working together in this project. I cannot tell you that I'm going to read your draft or your paper by Monday if I know that I have a grant due on Tuesday. That's unrealistic. How can I tell you this? I cannot put this in your mind. In the same way, I'm not expecting you to put an unrealistic expectation in my mind. We have to respect each other.
Can I just add to that? Just remember, as a PhD student, what happens when you get stamped on the forehead and you're out of here, you have your PhD. We're expecting you to become literally a colleague, hopefully work with us, and then we're totally equals. It's no longer mentor and student, it's two independent researchers collaborating together. And that's what we want to try and teach, that collegiate type of interaction between mentor and student as you get closer and closer to graduating. So just think about what's going to happen after you graduate. You're going to be writing the grant proposals yourself. You're going to be helping me write a paper. I might be helping you write a paper. You're going to be thinking of new research projects. In fact, you're going to have to think of your own new research projects. Think of new ways to look at things.
I have two things that drive me crazy with students. One is students not making an effort. I am, and this may be me, other people may disagree, I am more interested in the level of effort that a student is making rather than the progress that they're making in an instant. Yeah, I prefer to look at progress over a long period. I'm not concerned necessarily about whether you've made more progress today than yesterday. In a month or 2 months or 3 months, then I might start to worry about it. What I'm concerned about is the effort. And I've given talks to people about the incremental nature of creativity. You know, you talk to any scientist, and rarely will you see anybody say, it just came to me in a lightning bolt, and I understood the universe. It takes small steps and hard effort. And if you're not making that effort, that lightning bolt is never going to hit you. The second thing that really drives me crazy, all right, is when students don't try something, or they're afraid to start because they're afraid to fail. Oh, I'll do it tomorrow. It's this thing. Oh, and there's just something that keeps them going. And I believe, I have to talk to my psychology colleagues, but they're afraid that they'll look bad or they'll fail. And you know what? What I've learned, and what most successful people, I mean, the really, really rich people have failed many times, but they failed early. They started something right away, they took to it, then they realized quite early that what...
Learn from your negative results and use them for the one time that you're going to hit the ball out of the ballpark. That's the most important thing that you can do. So my pet peeve is also about lacking of effort. Did you give yourself a chance? Were you able to learn something from your failures and go back to the plate and hit the ball out of the ballpark? That's very important for me.
Thank you. And as we get to our last question, and I'm asking if you would just give us patience for just a few more minutes with the life and balance, because I think this is a good way to end. I'm going to go through this very quickly and then go to the next slide. One of them is, how are professors dealing with students who are lagging behind in class due to health reasons? That's one. And if someone has a quick answer for that, then I can get that answer and then move on to the next one. Does anyone have a quick answer for that? If a student has health reasons, how does a faculty member talk with them about it or handle that?
I don't think there's a general answer to that. I mean, it really is, it depends on the situation of the student. I mean, if these are long-term health problems, then you need to have a discussion with the GPDs and your advisor.
Okay, so having the discussion then is important, not just letting it happen, but having the discussion. And then finally, we're going to put these two together. Student says they're having trouble as a first-year student effectively balancing teaching assistantship, classes, lab. Does one take precedence over the other? How does that balance? And then how do professors do it? Professors have to manage research and teaching and service, their professional lives, their personal lives. So maybe if we can, at our ending, as we end, if each person can talk a little bit about balance, maybe something that students should do to balance in their thoughts, and then something that they do to balance in their own lives, and then we will end. We'll just go down the line. So we'll start with Dr. George.
In terms of my professional life, I guess I'm firefighting most of the time in terms of, you know, okay, I've got to get a class, I've got to prepare for class, I've got research deadlines coming up, I've got experiments I need to get finished, I've got committees to sit on. I just need to plan out each week, which is often varied, fairly ahead of time, and then be able to react quickly. But having said that, making sure that I do have some downtime. You know, I do actually have a private life, believe it or not. So scheduling out, you at least know the known problems, oh, sorry, in your case, the known chores that you're going to have to do in the next week, the next month perhaps. but making sure that you do have some downtime. You're not studying 24/7.
So short and long-term scheduling
Right.
help quite
And
a bit.
schedule in some, you know, you're allowed Sunday mornings off, okay, or something, you know.
7 to 7:15 Sunday morning.
All
Your
yours.
time.
Continuing on down the line, Dr. Murian.
My answer is, I chose this profession, and I knew what I was getting into. And I've given myself permission. I've said that before. I give myself a lot of permissions. The last permission I'll give is to be in an intense profession where I have to do a lot of juggling. It's very difficult to do, and sometimes I'm successful and sometimes I'm not. In the long term, the way I try to achieve balance is to do the best I can and close the door on it. If it doesn't mean I'm successful every day, some days I am, some days I'm not. I just keep going a day at a time, a week at a time. I try to exercise every day. I practice breathing and meditation. I go to church and I do all the things that I need to take care of myself and my family. So I try to, that's really the first on my list. But still, the struggle with the profession is permanent, and it's my choice, and I love it.
I think one of the things you find with graduate school is it's different. How many of you are first-year students? So the bulk of you are. Again, I can speak for my discipline and what I see with graduate students in my program. Everyone gets the classes taken care of. They sort of made that their #1 priority. What gets left in the wayside is the lab work, the thesis, the dissertation. You need to really step back and think about long-term and short-term goals. When are you going to get the thesis and the lab work done? Because the schedule for that and the goals for that are more amorphous. Summers are different now and vacations are different, I think, than when you were an undergraduate. I like summers for a whole variety of reasons, but one is it's more time for me to write up things. So you might want to think about, and that's what I do in my life now too. It's hard for me to write papers if I'm preparing for a test, for a class. But so I like large blocks of time to be able to do that. Think about long-term and short-term, as everyone's saying.
So I like block time. So I try and block all my teaching things together. I get my class prep done, I write my exams, I grade my quiz, I look at the homework, I put the homework on Blackboard, I teach my class, I have office hours, all in one block. And I keep it blocked as much as I can. I see students on those days blocked. And then I have block time for research. So I don't want to be scattered doing research. I don't want to think about a problem for 10 minutes on Monday and not get back to it Wednesday, and then maybe I'll start it again on Friday, and then it's Sunday night and I have to do it again. That's not going to work for me because it's going to take me 10 minutes to think about what I thought about the last 10 minutes. I want a nice 2 to 3 hour block of time in which that is what I'm doing. That research project is what I'm thinking about. And so I schedule my time in blocks. I put all my teaching stuff together, and I have block research times where I just don't let anything interrupt that time. And on a personal note, I have 2 kids, kindergarten and 2nd grade. So I know that, 4:30 hits, and I have to meet the bus at the bus stop, and then it's homework and soccer and bath, and just block it out. You're not going to get anything done. Don't think you're going to write your quiz or you're going to write your exam or grade your homework assignments. It's just not going to happen. So schedule, just block that time out for the kids and give everything you have to them. Yep. And then, stay up late, get up early, and be very, very effective in your use of time.
Dr. Topolewski?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, mine are 1 year older exactly,
Yes.
1st grade and 3rd grade.
Yeah.
And I find that, for example, the only time I have to practice my violin is between 11 and 3 a.m.
Yep.
And it's true. And now I ask the question, if somebody asks me something, I say, will this make me a better violinist? But see, I'm a full professor, I can do that. Yeah. But I do something, and I thought I could do it here. I do something with the undergrads when I do orientation classes all summer. And I say, when people say, do the math, we can actually do the math. And I'll do you a quick version if this pen works. Doesn't work. Does this one work? Does that one work? All right. There are, hopefully you can see this, there are 168 hours in a week. That's 24 times 7. If you sleep 8 hours a day, how many of you sleep at least 8 hours a night? Excellent, Alex, thank you. If you don't sleep 8 hours, you need more sleep. But if you sleep 8 hours, right, 56 hours, leaving you with 112 waking hours every week. You're up 112 hours. If your advisor tells you you need to be working 80 hours in the lab, 80 hours, that's a hell of a long, I'm on film, a heck of a long work week, all right? The undergraduates, if they're taking 15 credit hours and we tell them you need 3 hours outside of class for every hour inside, that's a 60-hour work week for them. If it's 80 hours, that's an awful long work week, but look at this. You've got 42 hours, that's your time. And you say, yeah, Dr. T, I know, but I got to eat, right? Doesn't that come out of the 42 hours? And I say, you know what? How many of you actually like to eat? Raise your hands. Yeah, right? What better use of your 42 hours is eating and doing stuff for you like everybody else said. The problem I think we face, and I have trouble with this, is we don't actively use this time. This is the time you wander into Target wanting to buy a new pen for your whiteboard, right? And you wander around for 4 hours, and you look at the shoes, and you say, isn't that a nice outfit for my third grader? And 4 hours later, you wander out of Target, you didn't even buy the pen that you went in for, right? You've lost that time. I think if you look at all of us, and a lot of professionals, when we play seriously. We take that 42 hours of time, and we make good use of it. Because if you do that, then you feel like, yeah, I've had some free time and that's been worthwhile free time. It's been active free time. When I was an undergraduate, I rowed crew, right? And what we would do is what we call active rest. We would never, like, after rowing, just wait on the water. No, the coach made us row at like half speed. He called it active rest. And I found out that's the best way to do it. If you're just going to blow away time watching TV for those 42 hours, you're going to feel like you wasted time, and that's the worst feeling you can have. And that's my advice on balance.
So turn the TV off. Don't turn the TV on.
Right.
If it's a trigger for you.
And our final comment, Dr. Fabry.
Well, I think I agree with everything that has been said here, and I'm using a lot of the same. And what really you need to do is you have to find something that works for you. Everybody is different. Everybody has a different way to deal with stress, with deadlines. It's a very good idea to be organized and have things planned out, but you have to put some flexibility in there. If you have family, if you have kids, unexpected things happen all the time. You need to be able to change your schedule on a whim and just take care of things. So, you know, the best advice that I can give you is don't panic, okay? What you're going through is the same that any of us has been through before. Sometimes it's a rite of passage. Sometimes it's like, okay, I got through this, I know that I can make it, and nothing is going to scare me anymore. If we did it, you can do it, and just make sure that, you know, that keep your eyes on the prize. There is always a big light at the end of the tunnel, and just reach for it, be a go-getter, be a proactive person. That's probably the best take-home message from what we've been saying or living in here.
Okay, well, I thank you very much, and we ask you to please consider all the things that the faculty have said. If you want to still add something to the blog, you can do that in terms of not necessarily adding questions, but your own thoughts about what might have transpired here. We will have snippets of this program online on our Promise channel on YouTube. Hopefully some of that will also get to the UMBCtube. Just snippets, it won't be the whole thing, but we're working with New Media Services. I thank New Media Services for working with us this afternoon. And I ask all of you to please fill out the evaluation. All of you hopefully received an evaluation coming in. Those are very important for us because they do help with the payment of the food that you received. If we can get that feedback, we would really appreciate it. At this point, let's thank our faculty members, Dr. Fabry, Dr. Kopaleski, Dr. Hoffman, Dr. Sunnyshine, Dr. Amirian, and Dr. George. We thank you so much. Some of them will be able to stay for maybe 15 more minutes if you'd like to talk with them one-on-one up at the front. We also invite you to get more food as you're filling out your evaluations. And again, we thank you all for coming. Our program is now officially over. Thank you so much.